president. That's what this is all about. This is not Ebola, okay? And I'll tell you what that means in a sense. It's not SARS. It's not MERS. It's not a death sentence. It's not the same as the Ebola crisis. Are you going to see some schools shut down? Probably. May you see impacts on public transportation? Sure. But we do this. We know how to handle this.
More on all of that in a bit. The president's eldest son also weighed in today on the criticisms of the administration's response.
Are you surprised the way they've been handling the coronavirus situation, meaning Democrats?
Not at all. I mean, we've seen, like you said, we've seen this play out for 4 years. Anything that they can use to try to hurt Trump, they will. The playbook is old at this point. But for them to try to take a pandemic and seemingly hope that it comes here and kills millions of people so that they could end Donald Trump's streak of winning is a new level of sickness.
And last night, in the middle of all of this, the Secretary of Health and Human Services showed that even among adults, job one in this president's cabinet remains praising the boss at all costs.
Just want to report to everybody that thanks to the president's historically aggressive containment efforts, we have really been able to keep the risk to Americans low right now so that everyday Americans don't need to be worried. But that can change, and that's why it's important for all of us to prepare. That's why the president is leading a whole of government effort. He's put the vice president in charge of our entire government, getting prepared and making sure our state, local communities also are prepared. And so the president really deserves incredible credit.
Meanwhile, Trump has decided to re-up his nomination of Republican Congressman John Ratcliffe of Texas to be Director of National Intelligence. Ratcliffe is one of the more fervent Trump supporters in Congress. His last nomination for this same job was DOA after mistruths were reported concerning his past prosecutions of terrorists.
Part of my background is that I was a terrorism prosecutor for George W. Bush. I'm John Ratcliffe. As U.S. Attorney, I prosecuted terrorists.
Point is, Ratcliffe was a U.S. attorney only on an interim basis and for less than a year. On to the 2020 front. This is the eve, of course, of the South Carolina primary, as you may have heard. Only the second primary, then days later we slam into Super Tuesday when voters in 14 states and 1 U.S. territory go to the polls. So it's a lot, but we'll get to it all. Here for our leadoff discussion on a Friday night, Dr. Celine Gounder, Clinical Assistant Professor of Medicine and Infectious Diseases at the NYU School of Medicine and Bellevue Hospital here in New York. She also happens to co-host a new podcast about the coronavirus, along with Ron Klain, who importantly ran the U.S. response during the Ebola outbreak.
I don't know about you, but something about that gives me an eerie feeling. An eerie feeling to know how that biological germs is evolving. And how that the scientific world don't have a reasonable explanation of why that this is occurring. It looks darn right wicked or eerie to me, especially whenever it has the capacity to attack people's immune systems that's already weak, people that's got AIDS, people that's old, people that has a depleted immune system, towards attacking that immune system to the point of bringing death to an individual. It looks eerie to me. That picture right there looks wicked of how those strands can get loose and get into a respiratory system or a blood system that would and can cause death and despair. There's nothing pretty about that picture that I'm looking at. To sum it up in one word, the word that I would use would be wicked. Because each one of those little bitty strands that you're looking at right there, regardless whether it be a fat strand, these are fat strands, or a little bitty strand. Actually, if the truth be known, probably the little ones are more dangerous than the big ones, because the big ones has to penetrate through a certain amount of tissue, and it's harder for them to break through the tissue than it is the little ones. It's kind of like having a little bitty needle versus a big needle. If you got a big needle, it's going to be tougher to get through the skin. If you got a really, really super thin needle, it'll go right through the skin and you'll never even feel it. You'll never hardly even notice it. So if the truth be known, out of this monster that you're looking at right here, which is the calamity of probably trillions of cells interacting with each other as it's evolving and escalating, it's the little guys like that one that you got to be concerned about. Or that one. Or that one. Or that one. Or that one. Because these bigger ones right here, they're not going to be able to break through as easily. Now that's my opinion. My opinion didn't cost you nothing. I'm not a medical doctor. I don't have a PhD. I haven't studied biological physics. I haven't ever worked in a laboratory before. That's just my opinion straight off the cuff. I might be wrong. Some doctors may tell you that the bigger cells are more powerful cells. The fatter ones and the bigger ones have more strength. And because they have more strength, they have more force. And because they have more force, they're more aggressive towards being able to break through various organs or various walls or various channels throughout the body. But my opinion would be the smaller ones are the lethal ones, because once they break through, then they can grow. Once they grow, then they become matted. Once they become matted, then they can cause their damage, regardless whether it's damage in the respiratory or damage in the blood. They can cause damage because it's an evolving, growing, kind of like a fungus. You know, you've seen bread. You take a loaf of bread, put it on the table long enough, and you'll eventually see fungus start growing on that bread. And if you leave that bread laying there long enough, it'll go from green to black. Because that's the mold. That's the fungus that's growing inside the bread. We take that same fungus today and use it as a form of penicillin that they discovered, I think, right after the Civil War era. Or it may have been during the Civil War era. I don't know. But the same type of fungus that you see growing on bread is the same thing that can become, the way that I understand chemical, biological, germ existence, that it can actually go airborne to the point that then it becomes a pandemic. Pandemic. Once it becomes a pandemic, then it basically seizes to whatever that it gravitates to. And it doesn't matter if it's a dog, it doesn't matter if it's a cat, it doesn't matter if it's a cow, it doesn't matter if it's a horse, it doesn't matter if it's a human. And of course we know that because our DNA is different than a horse, a cow, a dog, and a cat, there's going to be certain viruses or certain things out there that are going to have a tendency towards attacking the human body more so than, let's say, the hoof disease. There was a disease that came out not too long ago that was called the hoof disease that attacked pigs and cows. And I think there's been other diseases that attacks various animals. There's been contamination with chickens to where all of a sudden you have a whole swarm of chickens to go bad. This same virus or this same entity may very well not be effective in the human abotomy pertaining to our blood and our DNA because we have a completely different system. Our blood is different. Our system is different. So one thing can be lethal versus another won't even affect it. How does something like this create its own life, create its own entity? I don't know. I can't answer that question. I wish that I could. I can't answer the question pertaining to mold on bread. How it creates what it creates sitting out on a table. I'm sure it's got something to do with the yeast. I'm sure it's got something to do with the chemicals that the compounds that you put together in order to make bread to begin with. You know, if it was unleavened bread, it may not mold as easily. It may sit on the countertop 3 times as long before you start seeing mold develop. I don't know how it does it. It's just part of the process. It's kind of like rust on metal. We know that once metal gets exposed to air and to moisture, it immediately starts breaking down the fabric. Same way with cancer. Cancer, once it attacks someone's system, it's basically like rust. It starts growing, kind of like that mole on the bread. And if you don't catch it quick enough, it can actually put a human being to death. It can euthanize a human being. Like I said, I don't know all the graphics involved in this stuff. It's never been my cup of tea, per se, to want to know how all these different entities come together, kind of like the snake doctor. You know, I don't know how all that stuff works. I'm sure it's got to do with chemicals, regardless whether it's roots or something that you have made from tree sap or fish oil or whatever. I'm sure that, you know, if you're a chemist and you mix enough chemicals together, for surely there'll be some sort of an action. May not be the action that you want, but for surely there'll be some sort of an action. I think the Indians is the one that originally started the snake oil towards the medicine man going around doing this and doing that, towards taking herbs and taking this and mixing it with that and taking that and mixing it with this. I don't understand all this. And I'd be lying to you if I told you that I did. I just know by looking at the picture right there that I'm looking at right now, it looks lethal. It looks wicked. It looks like something that should not be in a person's system, regardless whether it be in their toe, their foot, their lungs, their blood system, their ear, their nose, their eye. It looks like something that could cause problems to me. It would be like taking water and mixing it with gas. There are certain things that just don't mix, and this would be one of them.
Susan Page, Washington bureau chief for USA Today, best-selling author, now hard at work on a biography of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. And John Heilman, equally hardworking, national affairs analyst, co-host of The Circus, which is back on Showtime, editor-in-chief of The Recount. Thanks for being here, everybody. And Doc, as you might have imagined, I'd like to begin with you. Walk me through the danger of the President of the United States saying there's 15 patients calling this a hoax, and his chief of staff saying this is not Ebola.
Let's break that down. In terms of the number of cases, we are massively under testing in this country. We've performed less than 500 tests for coronavirus in the US. South Korea, for example, which is a much smaller nation, has performed over 65,000 tests. So they have a much better sense for what is circulating in the community. Calling this a hoax, that's exactly the language that was used by West African leaders and people in the community back during Ebola. And that was really an effort to politicize the problem and not really address, not own up to the measures that were going to need to be taken.
You heard the chief of staff there when he followed saying this is not Ebola, saying, will there be some schools closed? Sure. Will there be disruptions in public transportation? How, if at all, does that differ from your projections of this as a professional?
Well, I think we have entered the phase of this being a pandemic, and there's been a lot of obsessing, is this an epidemic? Is this a pandemic? By definition, this is a novel virus to which people do not have immunity. They have not been exposed before. It is spreading rapidly. It is spreading in communities across several continents. So why it matters is that actually means you need to shift your strategy. So it's less about travel restrictions and quarantines and worrying about borders. And I know he was speaking about border walls earlier today. It's really about, wow, we really need to ramp up our testing. We need to worry about surges in patients coming to our emergency departments. What are we going to do about workplaces and schools? And that's why it's important to recognize where we are with all of this so we can make preparations while we still have time.
Susan Page, throw another log on the pile of firsts, a first president using this kind of language in the face of a coming potential health crisis. First presidential cabinet with members willing to say virtually anything in public as long as it backs up and supports the boss. Remind the folks watching tonight what normal might look like.
Yeah, this is a risky strategy for the president the hoax language tonight I thought was quite extraordinary. The argument that something's a hoax has worked pretty well for President Trump when he's talking about the Russia investigation or the investigation into the controversial phone call with the Ukrainian president. It is harder to convince Americans that there is a hoax going on if their kids can't go to school, if they have to telework, if they find their neighbors are hospitalized with this virus. People will know in their real lives, in their actual communities, whether this is a hoax or not. So this could create an enormous credibility problem for the president. And it is quite at odds with the kind of presidential leadership we saw during the Ebola crisis, for instance, where presidents try to convince people to stay calm, but to get prepared for the worst in case the worst comes. We are hearing the opposite from this president.
John, Susan just talked about what has worked for this president in the past. I always remind people he was the star of a television show out of this building for 14 seasons. He is all about branding and repetition. Perfect Call, the Russia hoax, witch hunt. Is this, however, where the facts run into his oncoming game? Does his game have limits?
Well, Brian, I think I want to say I hope so, but I don't want to say I hope so, right? You want to say at some point that the president's, that this game will end, and that we have predicted, all of us, for now 3 years, that there would come a time when the president's serial fabrications would meet a moment where, because of the circumstances or because of the nature of the lie he was telling, it would be, not only would it be revealed, because it's been revealed many times, but there would be consequences. Now, one does not want there to be consequences of the kind that I fear we're going to see in this case, but that is, I think, where we're headed. This is very dangerous, and when you hear Mick Mulvaney saying, this is not Ebola, this is not SARS, this is not a death sentence, it's utterly stunning to hear someone talk about a disease from which there will be fatalities. There are going to be fatalities. There are fatalities from the flu. Every flu season, people die from ordinary flus and not from this virus. And so the notion that they are attempting, apparently with an eye on the stock market and with an eye towards the kind of techniques and practice, repetition of falsehoods that you pointed to before, that they're focused more on that than they are on trying to save lives that are immediately at risk and will be at risk shortly. I think it's stunning, and I fear. I want to see the president have to pay a price. I don't want to have to to see him pay this price, but I fear that is the price that he is going to have to pay, and it's coming fast.
As we've been talking, the control room tells me 2 more confirmed cases, both in Washington state and the Pacific Northwest. That takes us in just the course of this conversation to 66 and not 15 confirmed cases in this country. Susan, why Vice President Pence, in what was just south of a heck of a job brownie event, the president, unrested, coming back from halfway around the world, held that news conference at the White House. Vice President Pence has been handed this task now, which for him so far tonight was secondary to being in Florida for a fundraiser.
Well, you know, it's in a way it's reassuring to have someone in a very high position of power able to command the resources of the administration to handle a crisis like this. On the other hand, I think there is at least, if you talked about the risks for President Trump, maybe some risks for Vice President Pence, that if at the end of the day there needs to be a scapegoat, he's going to be able to be identified as the guy who was in charge of responding.
John Heilman, back to a point you just made, and that is the stock market. The stock market, this president has promoted it, run on it, unlike any president in my memory. Larry Kudlow, again today, suggested people buy on the dips, buy on the stock price lows before perhaps this enormous event hits our economy. For a president who is, let's agree, empathy challenged, is this his gateway to engagement in this issue?
I think it could be, Brian. All I keep thinking is that suddenly we've seen the president talk about the Fed in ways that we've never seen a president talk about the Fed before. We see him talk about the market in ways we've never seen presidents talk about before, not just because they have principled objections to doing it, but because it's not politically prudent, because if you stake yourself on the upswing, on the booms, you also take it on the chin when there's a bust. And to hear Larry Kudlow, given the job he has, pretending to be like E.F. Hutton now and giving stock picking advice and telling people what to do, not just talking up the market, but actually telling American consumers, like apparently with the full faith of the United States, they're now issuing buy orders. I think it's a crazy place to be, but I do think that, to your point, I today was in New York City briefly, hard to believe, and I was with a very powerful group of financial executives talking about politics in front of them at a noontime briefing. And they were saying in this room, very sophisticated people with a lot of money in play in the market were saying, they've been expecting the country to be in recession at some point this year because of how fragile the fundamentals were. They said they've been looking out for the past 6 months, a triggering event. And now they said international firm too. They're utterly convinced that we're now headed towards a relatively severe recession before the end of the calendar year. And I think the president, is hearing talk like this from people like that. And that is part of what's driving him right now. And I can't imagine there's anything that's causing more panic than that, both because of the financial implications and the clear political implications for this president if such a thing were to occur, a stock market plunge that goes worse than the one we've seen so far, and the economy actually turning into recessionary territory. Would be very hard for him to get reelected in those circumstances.
Doctor?
And guess what? I have taken notice throughout the years of my life that in every election, a presidential election, something triggers the economy here in America to the point that it gets beat down to nothing. And how I have had it explained to me is that various people who make strong investments in and on the dime of what the President of the United States is involved in, once it falls into the year of an election year, because of the uncertainty and the doubt, they immediately pull a great deal of their interest out. They may be using this as a ploy, to be the trigger of doing this. But it does it almost every presidential election, to where it takes a bad downswing. And I don't know if it's a proving method for the next president, or the president that gets reelected the second time, or if it's just a method that they use, a trigger method that they use to be able to pull their money out on a presidential election. I have seen a pattern of this happening again and again and again. And they'll use different reasons for it. There was gas shortages back years ago. There was all kinds of things going on pertaining to this not being adequate, not being adequate. They make up stuff. They do. They literally make up stuff in a lot of cases just to validate the reason for swiping the cream off the top and basically starting all over again from ground zero. This time, the purpose for the triggering has happened over in China, that they're using now for a triggering mechanism of doing this. But I guarantee you, if it wasn't the deal with China, it would be who knows what. They create whatever fear that they want to create to give them an excuse so they can make a run to the banks or make a run on the money. That's the reason why I say that this type of system that has been created by man, off of the backs of the working class, off of the backs of basically the poor people, needs to be outlawed. And it not only needs to be outlawed here in America, but it needs to be outlawed worldwide, because God only knows that the people I'm talking about not millions, but billions of people that has gotten rich off the stock market. If it wasn't the stock market over here in America, it was the stock market over in some other country. They're all playing the same game. They build the pyramid up to a certain level. And then once it gets to a certain level, bingo, that's the triggering mechanism. And man, whenever they go into something, it reminds me of a bunch of piranhas, a bunch of fish. As soon as they realize that the feeding frenzy is on, it won't be just one or two of them that will go after the cream on top. It'll be all of them that'll attack. Just like a bunch of piranhas. And I mean, they'll work it down quick, buddy, till it gets to the point that it becomes pretty obvious towards what they're doing. And then they'll back off. They'll say, okay, we can't spoil it. We can't spoil our game plan towards what we're doing now to the working class and the mid-class people. See, this is the 1%ers that are playing this game. And like I said, if it didn't happen this time pertaining to the coronavirus, I guarantee you something else was around the corner that was fixing to occur. I don't know if it would have been the event happening with Syria and Russia. I don't know if it would have been another big terrorist attack. I don't know if it would have been somebody bombing somebody over in Iran or Pakistan and demolishing a bunch of oil wells. We're going to have a shortage of fuel now and create this panic. But I have seen this again and again and again and again. And anybody that's my age that has paid any attention to it knows what I'm talking about. This is a credible thing that I'm talking about. They pull off of the backs of the working people. There ain't no telling how much money has already been lost in just the average, everyday old Joe that thought that they had $15,000 or $20,000, and I'm just using this for an analogy, that now instead of them having $15,000 or $20,000, now they may have $4,000 or $5,000, or $7,000 or $8,000. In other words, it's been cut basically in half of somebody that only had $15,000 or $20,000. So you can imagine what's going to happen if you had $150,000 or $200,000 in there. You know, they're going to take a hit too, but it's not going to be quite as obvious of a hit. But they're going to take a hit too because of this. And we have seen this happen again and again and again, towards the rich getting richer, the poor getting poor. But the bad thing about it is the sharks, the piranhas, are getting rich off of the backs of the working class. And it's not just the working class here in America. It's the working class in Canada. It's the working class in Mexico. It's the working class in anybody that's hooked into the system. The working class in Germany. The working class in Australia. The working class in other parts of the planet. This isn't a one-time deal. This is a pattern that we're seeing of how that the wicked are taking advantage of the weak, the poor. And it needs to be outlawed. And until it does get outlawed, or they change the strategy towards what's going on, we're going to continue to see that much more suffering and that many more people losing their shirts. It's a heartbreak to me. It's sickening to think that these cold-hearted, and you know where most of them are that's playing this system like this? They go to church every day. Or not every day, but go to church every Sunday. They're in churches. The ones that claim that they're following under the practices of the Lord Jesus Christ, but they're living like the devil. Those are the wickedest ones that's in the majority of the churches.
Indeed, as an economic matter, which thankfully is not your bailiwick, the disruption to worldwide supply chain is so great already that we may be on a delayed end. It could get worse here because of what's already happened. Also, I heard a stock analyst today say his favorite stock to track is going to be Clorox. That gets your attention because we all know what that is used for in times like this. Final question to you, Doctor. If you were appointed special master of this crisis, what areas do you already see that you fear need filling in, that you fear we're not being diligent about?
I think the screening and testing right now is a real problem. I think we're massively under testing. We had a Japanese tourist, for example, who went to Hawaii and then returned to Japan, was diagnosed with coronavirus. They have some people who are supposedly being monitored, but none of them have actually been tested. And statistically, some of them must have had symptoms, even maybe if it wasn't from the coronavirus, symptoms that should have triggered testing. So the fact that there hasn't been a single test there is very alarming. The fact that the CDC has not gotten test kits out to the states and local health departments is very concerning. Today they said, well, and the way the test is done, it's actually 3 tests in one, 2 for the coronavirus, 1 is a control. The control wasn't working. So they said, oh, we'll just do it with the other 2. Well, then if you do the test, you don't actually know if your test is working. So, you have a lot of folks, including here in New York City, who are saying, well, we need to create our own tests and run our own tests because we don't trust what the CDC has. So I am very concerned about that because if you can't get a handle on the problem, how are you supposed to even manage it?
Tell the good folks watching again the name of your podcast because they want to stay up on this.
Epidemic.
Thank you very much. A short and simple name gets to the point here. Dr. Celine Gounder, Susan Page, John Heilman, a busy night. Our thanks for taking the time to talk to us. Coming up for us, a well-known Democratic activist is here to talk about the intersection of health and politics. And we are guessing, put it this way, Michael Moore may talk up Bernie Sanders a bit and later. By this time tomorrow night, we should know whether Joe Biden has put a victory on the board. A viewer's guide to South Carolina with Steve Kornacki when we continue here tonight as the 11th hour is just getting started on this Friday night.
This is gonna be a fun ride.
Cunol CoQ10.
We're prepared for the absolute worst. You have to be prepared for the worst, but hopefully it will all amount to very little.
President Trump, South Carolina tonight is his rally, speaking about coronavirus. You heard him earlier call it a hoax, as we have learned of new cases in California, Oregon, and 2 in Washington state just tonight. On Thursday, the president had this optimistic take as the virus continued to spread around the globe.
It's going to disappear. One day it's like a miracle. It will disappear. And from our shores, it could get worse before it gets better. It could maybe go away. We'll see what happens. Nobody really knows.
We are pleased to welcome a proud Michigander, movie maker, muckraker, also happens to be the host of Rumble with Michael Moore, which you can find wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Michael Moore is back here with us in our New York studios. And Michael, here's the thing. WDIV TV Detroit, WNBC TV New York, from Tuscaloosa to Tucson. This is about to become people's realities on local news. And local news comes roaring back into our lives when we are concerned about our surroundings, our brothers, our sisters, our community. That's going to become the truth for people. Talk about the danger of the president calling this a hoax.
I was in your green room just a little bit ago when I watched that for the first time. I heard him say that. And I have to say, it really sent a chill down my spine that the President of the United States, there's an obvious pandemic afoot across the globe. He understates how many people have, that we know they have it in this country, 4 times as many as the number he gave. If you have the president telling people it's a hoax, that there's nothing to worry about, that it will disappear, as he said yesterday, and it'll be a miracle. I sat there just now thinking before I came in here, which is more dangerous, a virus or a president who says that? Because at least if we were honest and knew everything about the virus and the facts were all out there, science could start to deal with it. The whatever inoculation needs to, whatever we need to come up with, whatever we need to invent, we can start that process. But the fact that we only have a few hundred test kits in this place or that place, that there's no effort at all.
They're running out of masks. I stopped at 3 different Walmarts this afternoon. I stopped at Milan. I stopped at Jackson. And I stopped at Humboldt. No, wait a minute. I've stopped at Martin, Humboldt, Milan. I didn't go to the Walmart in Jackson because I don't feel comfortable in going in there because my ex-wife works in there. But out of all 3 stops, and I've inquired about masks, and I'm talking about not just surgical masks, but I'm talking about the carpentry masks towards keeping dust and lint, in case you're doing a homebody project. Can't find no mask. People's hoarding a mask. The one place I went into, the woman told me, she said somebody just come in here a while ago and bought 12 boxes, bought all 12 boxes of the surgical mask. She said, you're about 30 minutes too late. So we don't even have masks to give you an idea of the severity of this in case it was to turn into some sort of a pandemic towards going airborne. And I'm kind of like this guy here. You know, whenever you have somebody that's telling you one thing and scientists is telling you something else, it's almost like, well, maybe he's wanting everybody to walk off into the mouth of the volcano. Well, everybody else is telling everybody else don't get near the volcano. You got somebody here that's telling everybody to walk off into the mouth of the volcano. I mean, I'm using that as an extreme. I'm using that, that analogy as an extreme. But I mean, it realistically, it almost looks that way towards saying it's a hoax.
Ongoing right now.
I just wonder if those people over in China right now, if you used to tell them of what they're going through and what that they have already went through, I just wonder how they would feel if you used to tell them, oh, everything that you've been experiencing, it's only your mind playing tricks on you. Don't believe none of this stuff that's going on, even though you can smell the snitch of death all the way around you, and you know good and well people has been suffering and screaming and hollering and kicking and crying and everything else. I just wonder what kind of an idiot that you would look like right now walking down the streets with a big PA system and telling everybody, it's only a figment of your imagination. What you have been witnessing is a hoax. It is not real. It is only your imagination running wild. Please go back to your normal way of life. It is a hoax. I know I'm using extreme analogies, but you follow what I'm saying. It's almost sad whenever you have your chief and commander that does not want to correlate with the rest of the experts. Kind of like how that he didn't want to correlate with his intel communities pertaining to them telling him one thing and him believing something totally different. I mean, come on. Where does this guy get off on trying to tell us that white's black and black's white, whenever we can see the results on TV of what's happening in other countries? I hope it don't turn into a pandemic. I hope it is nothing more than a sniffling cold. But according to what I'm hearing from the experts, get ready. Start preparing. This is going to be serious. Yes, what Donald Trump done as far as stopping flights from coming from one country to another may have slowed it down. It may have worked. And for God's sakes, this is the time now that we should be properly preparing if it was going to be a pandemic. This is the time that we should be sitting down and formulating some sort of an emergency plan towards utilizing and mobilizing our resources towards what if the worst case scenario was to occur. I do think that Donald Trump may have slowed it down. But now, whether or not it's just going to fade away and there's not going to be no major results, I think you get my drift.
Deal with the shot or whatever we're going to need to get if we need to get it, to pretend that it doesn't exist and to tell people out in Tuscaloosa or Detroit or whatever that there's nothing to worry about. And if he's wrong, and if the World Health Organization is saying it's now at the highest risk level, what do you call that man who tells his people that there's nothing to worry about? And not only that, it's made up by the Democrats and the media. This is, I hear Bernie say this all the time. This is the most dangerous president we've had. And yes, and you nod, and we've all said this maybe for 3 years. He's dangerous about this or that, the EPA, climate change, this. But this, forget about politics. Forget about Republicans and Democrats and who's running. That is the most dangerous thing I've ever heard a president say in my lifetime. And I just heard it 7 minutes ago. And I come out here and I don't know what to say to you other than what apparatus do we have to arrest, not arrest as in handcuffs, but to arrest the enforced ignorance that he is propagating here?
Well, as I asked of John Heilman, let's say these television markets I just mentioned, God forbid, are going to have a first case locally, God forbid, are going to have worse, and they're going to report it to their area of dominant influence. Is that where the president runs out of game here? Does he lose that power of repetition, that power of a dueling narrative?
I don't know what his move will be then. Who's he going to blame it on then? Is it maybe communists have infiltrated with a virus, or what? I mean, we can only guess, because we've been witness to so much madness in these 3 years that it's not worth our airtime discussing what crazy making thing he's going to say tomorrow or a week from now.
Do you trust the adults around him to
absolutely not
at long last?
No, we saw them in front of the camera last night, as you just pointed out, praising the boss. Great job, I got a great boss, and he's done an incredible job. And it's just like, wow, everybody's afraid to tell the emperor that not only there are no clothes, there's a real virus out there, and we have the ability to do what we can to contain it if there was a full forced effort to do that, but there isn't now. You can see now he's only worried about the markets, and he's down in doing a rally in South Carolina when there's no primary for him tomorrow. He's down there just to what?
He used the word troll tonight from the podium.
So he even owns it.
Yeah.
That we'd be better off maybe if that's all he was just a troll, but he is now a danger. He is a danger to the people of the United States of America. And I'm not just saying that again for political reasons. And by the way, in 2 months from now, if we have lost hundreds, thousands of people, don't be playing this bit of me. I'm here with you tonight, trying to warn people again of what's going to happen. That I've made a movie or come on this show or whatever. All I can do is to whoever is up and listening to this tonight is you must have your member of Congress and your senator, they must hear from you on the weekend, tomorrow. You must say, this is unacceptable. This has to be taken seriously. It is not a hoax. People's lives are at stake. I was thinking on the way down here, my grandparents lost a son and a daughter to the great flu influenza. 1919. They would have been my uncle and my aunt. My grandfather was the village doctor, country doctor, 1 year of medical school. And he was very careful because he didn't want to infect the family. So he went to the patient, the people were sick, had the flu, he went to their homes. He slept downstairs. He wouldn't sleep up where they slept with his family. Did everything he could. And still his son and his daughter, an infant and a toddler, got it and died. They would have been my aunt and uncle. They were my mom's brother and sister. And in fact, a year after that, depressed, having lost 2 babies, he said to my grandmother, why don't we have another kid? I mean, they'd had their 4 kids. He was already in his 50s. Let's have another kid. And my mom became that child.
My mother was born in the middle of it in 1918.
Is that right? You see, I mean, this is important.
We're going to pause. He's not going anywhere. We'll be right back with more of this. With this guy, Bernie Sanders with Michael Moore, and here's devil's advocate warning to everybody how I want to get into the Bernie question. I want to get into Bernie by asking you about Bloomberg, former mayor of this city. Guy grows up middle class, invents a computer that is so unique it's still on every trading floor in the country, gives him billions of dollars because of his unique invention. He has given $8 billion away to charity. Should there be billionaires? What should he do with the largesse that a capitalist society pays into a guy to buy his invention?
Sure. I agree with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez when she says that every billionaire represents a policy failure. The policy being that with that much, nobody should have that much money to then he gets to decide how he wants to be charitable. We, the society, need money to do the things that we need for the society to function. You and I were born in the 50s. Go back and look at any footage in the 50s of rich people, Beverly Hills, suburban New York, whatever. They've got swimming pools, they've got mansions, and they were being taxed at a rate of 70 to 90%, and they still had a great.
But their mansions
life.
were modest by today's standards.
Yeah, it was for them. It was a
palace.
Right? But my point is.
But how do you bracket that? How do you say, okay, Mr. Bloomberg, you can keep the profits from the first 1,000 computers, but after that, it goes into public welfare.
You can do actually well by making 100,000, 200,000, $500,000 a year. That's what more really does anybody need than that $500,000 a year? Am I missing something here?
That's not capitalism.
Oh, well,
it's not a capitalist society.
Yeah, but
the other
here's the
side
problem.
will say.
Capitalism is not democracy. Democracy means that everybody has a seat at the table and everybody gets a slice of the pie. That's democracy, and that's closer to that otherism than capitalism. Capitalism is only for the few to do really, really well, and everybody else struggle to get by, make ends meet, live as half of Americans do from paycheck to paycheck. That is just morally wrong on just that level alone. We did well when the rich did well, and everybody else got to live in the middle class and send their kids to college. And my dad was a factory worker and had a 4-week paid vacation. That's what I grew up in. We had free health care. We had the doctor was free. There were no copays or deductibles. The dentist was free. These eyeglasses were free. What happened to all that? What happened to college? What happened to going to UC Berkeley for nothing except your books? Where did we make this switch? And we allowed this, our generation allowed this, and we put it on the younger people. And that's why the younger people are for Bernie, because we've handed them a world where they're going to be in debt till they're well into their 40s, where they're going to live on a planet where they're choking to death, where you just go down the whole list of things and you can see why young people, the things that we take for granted that we got to have or our parents got to have, they don't get to have it, and they reject this ism. And by the way, this whole socialism, capitalism thing, nobody under 45 gives a rat's ass about it.
But it's going to be on the ballot, and you hear the complaint that
no
moderates are going to get pulled in running down ballot with a Democratic socialist.
They're going to
devil's advocate. Relax.
Yeah. Don't pick on it. Who are you talking to?
Cameron.
Leave Brian alone. It's those other MSNBCs.
Oh, look at the time.
No. Do I have? How much time do I have left?
What is it? 30 seconds. Michael Moore in 30 seconds. This I want to see. This I'm going to sit back and watch.
If we had Medicare for all, if we had a free healthcare system, nobody tonight would say, geez, I'm feeling I got a fever, I'm coughing, to go to the doctor, I can't afford it.
Yeah.
29 million don't have health insurance, another 50 million are underinsured. They don't have time. They go there and they're told, well, you got to go get this test for the coronavirus, but it's at that hospital. Oh, I'm sorry, it's out of network. You brought the wrong card. In no other democracy does this happen. If you're sick tonight, if you think you have the coronavirus, you go to the doctor first thing in the morning. It's free. The hospital's free. Everything's free. If we have people, just don't understand the danger of this. If we have a pandemic, if we have anybody who says, I'm going to put that off, they put everybody in danger. Not just themselves, but everybody. We're a safer society when everyone goes to the doctor for free. Everyone is covered. Nobody worries about going into debt.
To your point, the doctor told us not to shake hands. I would shake your hand. Thank you very much.
On the way I saw that, right? She would not shake your hand.
Continue to come on. And go talk to Bill Maher in regular intervals. Michael Moore, host of The Rumble with Michael Moore.
Thank you.
Wherever fine podcasts are sold or rented out. Coming up, Steve Kornacki, Big Board, final preview of South Carolina.
All right, there we have it. Ending up with Michael Moore. Good luck to all of us, and shalom.